Welcome to Lombok, a neighborhood in the West District of Utrecht. It is situated west from the city center, adjacent to the train station, along the canal Leidse Rijn. Central to the whole district is Kanaalstraat, which is surrounded by streets named after islands and areas formerly colonized by the Dutch, such as Balistraat and Sumatrastraat. The name of Lombok itself derives from an island in Indonesia, which used to be a part of the Netherlands East Indies, ruled by the Dutch. Built in the end of 19th and start of the 20th century, the district of Lombok, however, offers great variety to Utrecht, being certainly the most culturally diverse part of the town. Lombok consists of many shops and restaurants that vary greatly from the ones seen in the rest of the town. Plenty of donor places, supermarkets offering great variety of fruits, vegetables, spices, meat, and much more, several dress and fabric shops, a few phone repair shops, hair salons, bakeries, etc., and all of these for remarkably low prices. In this documentary, we will introduce you to this beautiful and outstanding district and show you how the global can be found in the local in this specific area.
Before we get into our more detailed and nuanced observations and findings of Lombok, some historical context might be in place, especially since this is of great relevance for the neighborhood. As we mentioned before, the district of Lombok was mostly built between the late 19th and the early 20th century, and most sources claim that before that time there were only a couple of windmills and small factory-like buildings. The significant building period that would lay foundation for Lombok as we know it today would have probably mostly happened between 1880 and 1920. Most descriptions of early development of Lombok claim that it was first considered a sociable and mostly Catholic laborer neighborhood. However, as we all know, this would soon change. Coming in 1960s, the Netherlands had developed a large deficit of worker forces as a large part of their society had shifted towards the tertiary sector of the economy. The Dutch government had to look for workforces outside of their country to solve this problem. In the beginning, these mostly came from Spain, Italy, and Greece. But during the 70s and the 80s, the main sources of guest workers would have become Morocco and Turkey, and the immigration flows from these countries proved to be much more significant than from the aforementioned. An interesting side note to be made here is that the policy the Dutch government applied here can actually be considered to be an example of a phenomenon that David Harvey describes as the spatial fix, which he illustrates as capital or capitalists looking for a solution to a situation where there is a surplus of capital or a deficit of labor forces, through either moving the capital or importing cheap labor forces. And he even names the guest worker programs within Europe as prime examples of this. But to return to the topic at hand, the Dutch government of course also had to provide housing for these guest workers, a lot of which is still being used today. These houses are often stereotyped by being very bland, packed next to and on top of each other, and being very homogeneous. Lombok is one of the many neighborhoods whose housing and buildings would later be characterized by this phenomenon, as even the majority of the housing at this time are still the same tightly packed terraced houses, and only a small amount of nicer, oftentimes renovated houses exist within Lombok. The only places in Lombok where you will find more expensive standalone houses are the old parts, oftentimes located on the very edge of the neighborhood. Nowadays, it's not hard to imagine how Lombok ended up becoming so diverse. But back then, the guest workers were actually expected to move back within a couple of years. But a significant amount of them realized the circumstances here were better or got so integrated within their work environments that they ended up reuniting with their families by legally having them brought over to the Netherlands. This, in turn, resulted in a huge increase in the number of immigrants in Lombok. Today, we can still see the remnants of all these historic events. From the many second or third generation immigrants still living there to all the aforementioned housing.
In today's globalized world, the concept of space-time compression is a topic on which many scholars gladly get their take on. When encountering a place like Lombok, we cannot ignore the many questions that arise with such a strong presence of different global cultures. We live in an era where the local communities seem to get increasingly more homogenized, losing their peculiarity. The same music, food, clothes that we're used to at home can be quite easily found abroad, and this clearly has changed how we think about locality. For many, the response is a reactionary one, seeking a strong sense of place and locality in between this relentless flux of civilization in order to secure a sense of assurance of fixity. But is this the right way to find a new sense of place in response to the ever-growing spread of globalization? Seems like a step back. Instead, a different framework can be used to conceptualize the uniqueness of places in a better and less protectionist way. The individuality of a place does not arise from its unaltered and internalized history, but from the myriad of social relations, exchange of knowledge and culture that take place in such locus. Massey states that, instead of thinking of places as areas with boundaries around, they can be managed as articulated moments in networks of social relation and understandings, but where a large proportion of those relation, experiences, and understandings are constructed on a far larger scale than what we happen to define for that moment as the place itself, whether that be a street or a region or even a continent. And this in turn allows a sense of place which is extroverted, which includes a consciousness of its links with the wider world, which integrates in a positive way the global and the local. An example of how the global enters the local was provided to us by the owner of a clothing shop in Lombok. What attracted us was the display of beautifully crafted and colorful dresses, which we assumed were the result of a strong ethnic background. We were able to speak to the owner, a Dutch woman of Moroccan descent, who explained to us the choice for her inventory. She creates long dresses to meet the demand of other Moroccan women, who constitute the majority of her clientele, but at the same time, she is also able to appeal to the taste of Dutch women in search of something different and exotic. Furthermore, she also produces children's garments with a more subtle color scheme, usually black or white, to provide Dutch citizens with low prices for children's ceremonial clothes. Usually, these clothes are bought for occasions such as the Catholic First Communion or weddings. This way, the owner is able to transcend both space and religion to prosper in her business and to accommodate the needs of the different cultures that surround her.
Another store owner we got the opportunity of asking some questions was that of Surinaam's Eethuis Aarti, a Surinamese eatery. This was quite the appealing place as it stood out between the endless amount of donor places there are in Lombok. Luckily, the owner was willing to sit down with us, and we started off by asking him about the multi-ethnic and diverse makeup of the neighborhood, and how this has influenced his and other businesses in the area, to which he gave quite an interesting answer. He stated that over the 35 years that he has worked and lived there, the neighborhood has changed quite a bit. He elaborated on this by explaining that 30 to 35 years ago, there would still be some Dutch, and what he meant by this was non-immigrant Dutch, venturers and entrepreneurs, but as the societal makeup of Lombok started changing, these started going extinct, as they did not seem to pull a lot of customers and they could not keep themselves afloat. When we followed that up by asking him what kind of businesses did survive and thrive here, he answered simply but concisely, "Look around." He explained the statement by adding that there's about 14 donor places, 10 hairdressers, and 7 Moroccan dress stores within an immensely small radius. An obvious testament as to what people were interested in this area. Later we asked him about what kind of people make up his clientele. And interestingly enough, he said that even though there are people from all kinds of backgrounds and there are still some Surinamese regulars, the main part of his clientele consists of Dutch people without an immigration background. He explained that he thinks that this might be because the products he sells are unique and new to a lot of those people. And those that come to his store and live in the neighborhood are often surprised by the kind of food he sells. Now, throughout some of the descriptions of this interview, you might have already heard some allusions to Massey's work. For example, Massey's description of reactionary responses to increased homogeneity might be linked with how when immigrants started making up the majority of the neighborhood, mostly only the stores that were somehow linked to their background managed to thrive, as kind of a reactionary pullback to their own cultural identity when they got mixed in here with a new Dutch one upon arrival. But the statement about how his clientele is now very diverse and even a significant amount of non-immigrant people come to his place might indicate that the neighborhood has adapted more towards the kind of framework that Massey advocates for, where intercultural connections and interactions are not only respected but thrived upon.
Another example of the global in the local was a small shop selling scarves, hijabs, dresses, and many beautiful fabrics. We managed to interview the friendly owner of the shop, who himself was a Dutch man of Moroccan descent. He emphasized, just like the woman who owned the dress shop, that people from different ethnicities visit his store for different products. The Moroccan people come there for the dresses and gowns for special occasions, whilst Turkish and Dutch come there for the scarves and headscarves, as well as the beautiful fabrics. He also told us that his store was not typically Moroccan, as only some of the dresses he sold were typical to Moroccan culture, whilst most of his other products were varied in nature to appeal to a big number of different customers. In that way, the many cultures that meet in Lombok get mixed and what could be considered as a new culture emerges far from the place of origin.
As outsiders to this community, it was obvious to us how a combination of different cultures produced an environment which was unique to any other in the city. Moreover, as we informed ourselves about the community, we couldn't help but realize Lombok has a progressive sense of place, as it has changed a lot in a very short time period. Massey ends her article A Global Sense of Place with the following statement. It is a sense of place, an understanding of its character, which can only be constructed by linking that place to places beyond. A progressive sense of place would recognize that without being threatened by it. What we need, it seems to me, is a global sense of the local, a global sense of the place. Lombok is a perfect example of how Massey's concepts apply to a place and a time. Because of its diversity and its history, Lombok stands out in Utrecht. The diverse ethnic makeup of the district contributes to the diverse types of businesses in Lombok, native to cultures far away from the Netherlands. Consequently, this leads to a display of the global into the local. In Massey's words, the description, definition, and identification of a place is thus always inevitably an intervention not only into geography but also, at least implicitly, into the retelling of the historical constitution of the present. It is another move in the continuing struggle over the de-alienation and characterization of space and time.
Take a walk on the wild side, and the colored girls say, do 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 do.